The first light of dawn crept through the blinds of Peak Pulse Logistics' Asheville office, casting long, slanted shadows across the open-plan workspace. The air was still, heavy with the scent of stale coffee and the faint hum of a distant air conditioner. Emma Larson sat alone at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, the glow of her monitor the only source of warmth in the early morning chill. At 34, she was the regional team lead of the company's most profitable division, a role she'd carved out over 5 years of relentless dedication. Her desk was a testament to that life. A small succulent, a gift from her team last Christmas, sat proudly beside a stack of handwritten notes. Tokens of gratitude from colleagues she'd mentored, late-night strategy sessions she'd led, and birthdays she'd never let pass unnoticed. This was her domain, her second home. Until 2 minutes ago. The email stared back at her, its words sharp and unyielding, like a blade slipped between her ribs. She blinked, willing the text to rearrange itself into something less devastating, but it remained unchanged. Her breath caught as she read it again, the cursor blinking mockingly at the end of the final line. Subject: termination of employment. Emma, effective immediately, your employment with Peak Pulse Logistics is terminated. Your absence during a vital operational period has demonstrated a failure to prioritize company objectives. Please clear your desk by the end of the day. Susan Hayes in Human Resources will handle the exit paperwork. Greg Nolan, Director of Operations. Emma's hands fell to her lap, the leather chair creaking in the silence. 3 days. That's all it had been. 3 days of approved bereavement leave to bury her mother, to stand graveside as the Carolina soil was turned, to hold her brother's hand as the preacher's voice trembled in the autumn wind. 3 days, and now this. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft but steady, a lesson from childhood by the French Broad River. The water moves, Emma girl, but the rocks stay put. Be like the rocks. She wanted to be steady now, but the ground beneath her felt like it was crumbling. She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window where the Blue Ridge Mountains loomed, their peaks softened by morning mist. Asheville was waking up outside. Delivery trucks rumbling down Biltmore Avenue, tourists already queuing for coffee at the artisanal shops downtown. Inside the office was a ghost town, the cubicles empty, the fluorescent lights still off. Emma had come in early, as she always did after time away, eager to dive back into the rhythm of her work. The quarterly reports were due next week, the Henderson contract needed final tweaks, and her team was counting on her to steer them through the chaos of a recent merger. She'd planned to stay late to make up for lost time. Instead, she was packing. Her eyes fell to the succulent, its plump green leaves catching the first rays of sunlight. For our fearless leader, the card had read, signed by all 7 of her core team members in a flurry of colorful ink. She could still see them crowded around her desk last December, laughing as they presented it, insisting it was the only plant even she couldn't kill. Next to it, a framed photo from the company retreat last spring, her team sprawled across a grassy field near Lake Lure, their faces lit with the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared victories and late-night deadlines. These were her people, her family in all but blood. And now, she had to leave them. Emma's fingers brushed the edge of a note pinned to her bulletin board, the handwriting unmistakably Tara's, her logistics specialist. Thanks for believing in me when I didn't. You're the best boss I've ever had. Her throat tightened. She'd built this team from the ground up, turning a ragtag group of hires into the highest-performing division in Peak Pulse's Southeast operations. 18% profit growth last quarter, a merger sealed without a hitch, client retention rates that made corporate take notice. And yet, Greg Nolan's email reduced it all to one phrase: failure to prioritize. Greg. The name alone sparked a flicker of anger. He'd been her supervisor for 2 years, a man whose thin smiles and pressed suits barely masked his obsession with metrics over people. He'd approved her bereavement leave himself, his voice clipped but professional over the phone last week. "Take the time you need, Emma. We'll manage." She'd thanked him, grateful for the space to grieve, to lay her mother to rest. Now his signature sat at the bottom of her termination notice, as if her mother's death was a scheduling inconvenience. She stood, her movements slow, deliberate, and opened her desk drawer. A cardboard box from the supply closet would do. She began packing, each item a small wound. The succulent went in first, wrapped in tissue to protect its fragile leaves. Then the photo, the notes, a mug with "World's Okayest Boss" scrawled in bold letters, a gag gift from Caleb, her data analyst, after she'd spilled coffee on his keyboard during a frantic meeting. 5 years of her life condensed into a box she could carry in one arm. The office began to stir as the clock ticked toward 8:00 a.m. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, the soft clatter of keyboards starting up. Emma kept her focus on her task, folding a sweater she'd left draped over her chair, tucking away a spare charger. She didn't want to be here when the others arrived, didn't want to face their questions, their pity. But she wasn't fast enough. "Emma, what the hell?" Tara's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with confusion. She stood frozen in the doorway, her messenger bag still slung over one shoulder, her dark curls escaping a hasty bun. Her eyes darted to the box, then back to Emma's face. "Why are you packing?" Emma forced a small smile, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I've been let go, Tara." "Let go?" Tara's bag hit the floor with a thud. "What do you mean, let go? You're the best thing this place has going for it." Before Emma could respond, Caleb appeared behind Tara, his lanky frame filling the doorway. "What's going on?" His usual smirk vanished as he took in the scene. "Emma, why's your desk half empty?" "She's been fired," Tara snapped, her voice rising. "Can you believe this?" "Fired?" Caleb's jaw dropped, his glasses slipping down his nose. "For what? You just closed the Meridian deal. Profits are through the roof because of you." Emma taped the box shut, her fingers trembling slightly. "Apparently, taking bereavement leave to bury my mother wasn't the right priority." The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading across Tara and Caleb's faces. Tara's hands clenched into fists. "Bereavement leave? That's what this is about? Greg approved it, didn't he?" "He did," Emma said simply, sliding the box to the edge of her desk. "But, according to his email, I wasn't here during a vital operational period." "Vital operational period?" Caleb echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What, the Henderson contract, the one you prepped us for before you left? This is bullshit, Emma." "Language, Caleb," Emma said, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite everything. It was the kind of gentle reprimand she'd given him 100 times, and for a moment it felt like any other day. But the weight of the box in her hands pulled her back to reality. Tara stepped closer, her voice low, urgent. "Have you talked to Rachel? The regional manager needs to know about this. She'd never let Greg pull something this stupid." Emma shook her head, wrapping the succulent in another layer of tissue. "I'm not fighting it, Tara. It's done." "Not fighting it?" Tara's eyes widened. "Emma, you can't just walk away. This is wrong. You're the heart of this team. We need you." The words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they were too true. Emma looked around the office, at the cubicles where her team would soon sit, unaware that their leader was being cast out. She thought of Mia, who'd cried in her office after a tough performance review, only to come back stronger with Emma's coaching. Of Javier, who'd trusted her with his dream of starting his own business someday. Of Sophie, who'd baked cupcakes for every team milestone. These were the people she'd poured her soul into, and now she was supposed to leave them to Greg Nolan's cold calculations? "I appreciate that," Emma said, her voice softer now, "but I need to handle this my way." Caleb crossed his arms, his brow furrowing. "Handle it how? You're not seriously just going to pack up and go, are you? What's Greg's deal anyway? He's been weird ever since the merger. You think he's gunning for your job? The question hung in the air, a spark of intrigue that Emma hadn't considered. Greg had always been ambitious, his eyes fixed on the next rung of the corporate ladder. But her job? She was the one who'd made this division shine, who'd turned Peak Pulse's Asheville office into a model of efficiency. Why would he sabotage that? Unless there was something she didn't know, some game being played behind closed doors. I don't know, Emma admitted, her mind racing. But I'm not sticking around to play detective. Tara's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her expression darkening. Speak of the devil, Greg's here, just pulled into the parking lot. Emma's stomach twisted. She'd hoped to be gone before he arrived, to avoid the confrontation she knew was coming. But there was no time to slip out now. The office was waking up, her team trickling in, their voices a low hum as they settled at their desks. She could feel their eyes on her, the questions forming in their minds. Emma, you don't have to face him alone, Caleb said, his voice firm. We've got your back. She met his gaze, then Tara's, and saw the fierce loyalty there, the kind that doesn't waver even when the world shifts beneath you. It was almost enough to break her composure, to make her want to fight, to storm into Greg's office and demand answers. But her mother's voice whispered again, be like the rocks, steady, unmoved. She'd face this, but on her terms. Thanks, she said, lifting the box, but I need you both to get back to work. Don't give Greg any reason to come after you, too. Tara opened her mouth to protest, but a look from Emma silenced her. With a reluctant nod, she grabbed her bag and headed to her cubicle, Caleb trailing behind, muttering under his breath. Emma took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. The box felt heavier now, not from its contents, but from what it represented. The end of a chapter she hadn't been ready to close. The elevator dinged and Greg Nolan stepped into the office, his briefcase swinging at his side. He was all sharp angles, crisp suit, slicked back hair, a man who looked like he'd been cut from a corporate mold. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Emma with a flicker of something... surprise, maybe? Or unease? He hadn't expected her to be here so early. Emma, he said, his voice smooth but edged with authority. I'd hope we could handle this quietly. End of the day would have been better for everyone. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Quietly, like the email you sent me at 5:00 a.m. firing me for taking approved leave? His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Business moves fast, Emma. You know that. Peak Pulse needs people who can keep up, who put the company first. Your absence. My absence, she cut in, her voice low but sharp, was to bury my mother. You signed off on it, Greg, or did you forget? For a moment he faltered, his polished facade cracking. The office had gone silent, her team watching from their cubicles, their work forgotten. Greg adjusted his tie, regaining his composure. This isn't personal, it's about what's best for the company. You should have waited until the end of the day to pack. No need to make a scene. Emma's laugh was soft, bitter. A scene? Don't worry, Greg, I'm not here to throw a tantrum, but you might want to remember this moment. It could matter later. His eyes narrowed, as if trying to decipher her words. Was it a threat? A promise? Emma didn't elaborate. She picked up her box, the weight grounding her, and walked toward the elevator. Her team's eyes followed her, a mix of anger and disbelief, but no one spoke. Not yet. She could feel the storm brewing, the questions they'd ask, the loyalty that might upend everything Greg thought he controlled. As the elevator doors closed, Emma caught a final glimpse of the office, Tara's clenched fists, Caleb's furious glare, and Greg, standing alone, his briefcase still in hand, the box pressed against her chest, the succulent's tissue crinkling softly. She didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end, not for her, and not for the team she'd built. The river was moving, but she was a rock, steady and unyielding, ready for whatever came rushing her way. The elevator descended, and Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She shifted the box to one arm, pulling it out. A text from Tara. "This isn't over. We're with you." Another from Caleb. "Greg's gonna regret this." And then a third, from an unknown number. "Heard what happened. Call me. Tom Brennan, Apex Transit." Emma stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Tom Brennan, the CEO of Peak Pulse's biggest competitor, a man who'd tried to recruit her at a conference last year, his card still tucked in her wallet. The elevator dinged, opening to the lobby, and Emma stepped out into the crisp Asheville morning. The French Broad River glinted in the distance, its current steady, relentless. She didn't know what Tom wanted or what her team was planning or how Greg's decision would unravel, but as she walked to her car, the box in her arms and the river at her back, she felt the first stirrings of something new. Not revenge, not yet, but possibility. The Asheville morning was deceptively warm for September, the air carrying the faint sweetness of honeysuckle as Emma Larson stood beside her car, the cardboard box from her desk resting heavily in her arms. The Peak Pulse Logistics building loomed behind her, its glass facade reflecting the rising sun like a polished shield, hiding the chaos she'd just left behind. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, a relentless pulse of messages from her team. Tara's fierce promise, Caleb's defiant outrage, and that cryptic text from Tom Brennan, CEO of Apex Transit Solutions. The French Broad River glimmered in the distance, its steady current a quiet reminder of her mother's words. "The water moves, Emma girl, but the rocks stay put." She wanted to be a rock now, unyielding against the torrent of betrayal, but the weight of the box, the sting of Greg Nolan's email, and the uncertainty of what came next threatened to pull her under. Emma slid the box into her trunk, the succulents, tissue paper crinkling softly, a small sound that grounded her. She closed the trunk with a deliberate thud and leaned against the car, her gaze drifting to the river. Her mother had loved this city, its eclectic streets and mountain backdrop, its blend of grit and grace. They'd spent countless Sundays by the French Broad, fishing poles in hand, her mother's laughter mingling with the water's rush. "Life's like this river," she'd said once, her hands steady on the reel. "It'll try to sweep you away, but you choose where you stand." Emma had stood firm at Peak Pulse for 5 years, building a team that felt like family, a career that defined her. Now that foundation was gone, washed away by a single email. But the river was still moving, and she wasn't done standing. Her phone buzzed again, and she pulled it out, expecting another message from her team. Instead, it was an email notification, the subject line stark: "Separation Agreement Details." It was from Susan Hayes in HR, already pushing the paperwork to finalize her exit. Emma's jaw tightened. She hadn't even left the parking lot, and Peak Pulse was scrubbing her from its system like a stain. She opened the email, skimming the clinical language. 2 weeks severance, a non-disparagement clause, a reminder of her non-compete agreement. 6 months barred from working for competitors within a 300-mile radius. It was a shackle disguised as a contract, designed to keep her from rising too quickly, from threatening the empire Greg Nolan thought he controlled. Greg. The memory of their confrontation flashed through her mind, his polished shoes clicking on the office floor, his voice dripping with false civility. "I'd hoped we could handle this quietly, Emma. End of the day would have been better for everyone." She'd wanted to scream, to hurl the box at him and demand why he'd betrayed her after approving her leave. Instead, she'd met his gaze with a quiet resolve that unnerved him, her words a subtle warning. "You might want to remember this moment. It could matter later." She hadn't planned the threat, but it felt right, a seed planted in the fertile soil of his unease. Greg Nolan might think he'd won, but Emma knew better. The river always finds a way. She climbed into her car, the leather seat cool against her back, and started the engine. The radio hummed to life, a local station playing a bluegrass tune that reminded her of her mother's old records. She turned it off, needing silence to think. Tom Brennan's text glowed in her mind. "Heard what happened. Call me." Apex Transit Solutions was Peak Pulse's biggest rival, a company known for its innovative logistics and employee-first culture. Tom had approached her at a conference last year, his silver beard and booming laugh disarming as he'd handed her his card. "You ever get tired of Peak Pulse? We'd love to have you." She'd laughed it off then, loyal to her team, her role, her life at Peak Pulse. Now that loyalty felt like a wound, and Tom's offer was a lifeline she couldn't ignore. But the non-compete loomed, a shadow over any move she might make. Could Apex's legal team really challenge it? And what about her team? The 7 people who'd become her professional family. Tara's fierce loyalty, Caleb's quick wit, Mia's quiet determination, Javier's ambition, Sophie's warmth, Lucas's steady pragmatism, Nora's sharp intuition. They were the heart of her success, the reason Peak Pulse's Asheville office had soared. Leaving them behind felt like abandoning her own kin, but dragging them into her uncertain future might be reckless. She gripped the steering wheel, the river's glint visible through the windshield. "Be like the rocks," she told herself. Steady, but not stagnant. She'd call Tom, but first she needed answers. The Peak Pulse parking lot was filling up now, familiar cars pulling in as her team arrived. Emma's heart ached at the thought of them discovering her absence, of Greg spinning some sanitized story to justify her firing. She couldn't leave without tying up one loose end. Susan Hayes deserved to know the truth, and Emma needed to see if HR's unease matched her own suspicions. She grabbed her phone, forwarded Greg's termination email to her personal account, and drove back toward the building. The box could wait in the car. This was about clarity, not closure. The HR office was on the 3rd floor, a sterile space with white walls and minimal decor, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the main office. Susan Hayes sat behind her desk, her auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, her expression a practiced mask of professionalism. But when Emma walked in, unannounced and still in her work blazer, Susan's composure faltered, her eyes widening slightly. "Emma," Susan said, rising from her chair, I wasn't expecting you so soon. I just sent the paperwork." "I got it," Emma replied, closing the door behind her. The click echoed in the quiet room. "But I need to talk about what happened. Off the record, if you're willing." Susan hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting Greg to barge in. Then she nodded, gesturing to a chair. "Sit. I'm listening." Emma sat, her hands folded in her lap, the weight of the morning pressing against her chest. "You seemed surprised when I mentioned the termination earlier. I need to know why." Susan's fingers tapped nervously on her desk, a pen rolling slightly under her touch. "It's unusual, Emma. I've been here 6 months, and I've never seen a team lead let go like this. No performance improvement plan, no documented issues, just an email. It's not how we do things." "Then why did it happen?" Emma's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. She pulled out her phone, opened the termination email, and slid it across the desk. "Read this. Tell me if this makes sense to you." Susan's eyes scanned the screen, her brow furrowing as she read Greg's words. "Your absence during a vital operational period has demonstrated a failure to prioritize company objectives." She looked up, her professional mask slipping entirely, replaced by something closer to shock. "This is the actual notice? Just this? He fired you for taking approved bereavement leave?" 3 days, Emma said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "To bury my mother. Greg signed off on it last week, told me to take the time I needed. Now he's calling it a failure to prioritize." Susan leaned back, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is cold. Unfair doesn't even cover it." "There's no precedent for this in your file, Emma. You're the top performer in this region. The Henderson contract, the Meridian merger, those were your wins." "So why am I out?" Emma leaned forward, searching Susan's face for answers. "What's Greg playing at? Is this about the merger, a power grab, or something else?" Susan's gaze flicked to the door again, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I don't know, Emma, but I can tell you, Greg didn't consult me before sending this. He went straight to corporate, claimed it was urgent. I only found out when the paperwork hit my desk this morning. Emma's mind raced. Greg bypassing HR was a red flag, a move that suggested he was covering his tracks, or someone else's. But whose? Rachel Thornton, the regional manager, was out of town at a conference in Charlotte. Could Greg have acted alone, or was there a larger game at play? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the woman in front of her. "What happens now, Susan? You've seen the email, you know it's wrong. What can you do?" Susan's shoulders slumped, a rare crack in her HR armor. "I can escalate it to legal, flag it for review. But Emma, North Carolina is an at-will state. Peak Pulse can terminate without cause, and Greg's email, flimsy as it is, gives them cover." "I'm sorry." Emma nodded, unsurprised but disappointed. "I'm not here to beg for my job back. I just needed to know where you stood." Susan's eyes softened, a flicker of empathy breaking through. "Off the record, this isn't right. If you wanted to pursue action, legal, public, anything, I'd support you. Discreetly, of course." The offer hung between them, tempting but heavy. Emma could sue, could drag Peak Pulse through the mud for wrongful termination. She had the email, her performance record, her team's loyalty. But the thought of a courtroom, of months spent fighting a company she'd once loved, felt like sinking into quicksand. Her mother's voice echoed again. "Be like the rocks. Rocks don't chase the current, they let it flow past." She'd find another way, a steadier path. "Thank you," Emma said, standing. "But I'm not fighting this, not like that." Susan rose too, her expression a mix of admiration and regret. "You're stronger than I would be, Emma. Whatever you do next, they'll regret letting you go." Emma managed a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She left the HR office, the weight of Susan's words lingering. Regret. She didn't want Peak Pulse's regret. She wanted her life back, her team, her purpose. But as she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed with another text from Tara. "Emergency team meeting at noon. We're not letting this slide." Emma's heart skipped. Her team was rallying, and she hadn't even asked them to. The river was moving faster now, and she wasn't sure she could stay steady much longer. By midday, Emma was back in her apartment, a cozy loft in West Asheville with exposed brick walls and a view of the mountains. The box sat unopened on her kitchen table, the succulent's green tips peeking through the tissue. She'd meant to unpack, to sort through the relics of her Peak Pulse life, but instead she paced, her phone clutched in one hand. Tom Brennan's text was still unanswered, a question mark pulsing in her mind. She opened her contacts, found his number, and hesitated. Apex Transit Solutions was a leap into the unknown, a rival company with bigger ambitions and deeper pockets. But her non-compete was a chain around her ankles, and she needed to know if it could be broken. She dialed, her pulse quickening as the line rang. Tom answered on the second ring, his voice warm and gravelly, like a campfire on a cold night. "Emma Larson, I was hoping you'd call." "Tom," she said, keeping her tone neutral, "your text was timely. How did you hear about what happened?" He chuckled, the sound rich with knowing. "Word travels fast in this industry, Emma. A star like you gets cut loose, people talk. I'm just sorry it went down like that." She leaned against the counter, the mountains framed through her window. "I appreciate that. But I need to know what you're offering and whether it's even possible with my non-compete." "Straight to the point," Tom said, approval in his voice. "I like that. Apex is expanding our Southeast operations, and we need a division director to lead the charge. Your track record, 18% profit growth, the Meridian merger, makes you the perfect fit. Better title, better pay, more autonomy. And as for that non-compete, our legal team's already looked at it. It's overly broad, Emma. Firing you for approved bereavement leave? That's bad faith. A judge would laugh it out of court." Emma's breath caught. Division director. A step up from her role at Peak Pulse with authority she'd only dreamed of. But the non-compete was a specter, its 300-mile radius a cage that could trap her in limbo. "You're sure it's unenforceable? Peak Pulse won't take kindly to me jumping ship." Let them try, Tom said, his voice hardening. We've got the resources to fight, and we'll cover any legal costs. You're worth it, Emma. The question is, are you ready to leave Peak Pulse behind? The question landed like a stone in her chest. Leaving Peak Pulse meant leaving her team, the people who'd texted her all morning, who were meeting now to plot their response to Greg's betrayal. Could she abandon them to Greg's micromanaging, to a company that saw grief as a liability? But staying meant groveling, begging Rachel Thornton for a job she'd already earned. She thought of the river, its relentless flow. Rocks didn't chase the water, but they didn't sink either. I need to think about it, she said finally. Can we talk specifics tomorrow? Take the weekend, Tom replied. I'll be here, but Emma? Don't let Peak Pulse clip your wings. You're bigger than they are. The call ended, and Emma set her phone down, her mind a tangle of hope and fear. She walked to the window, the mountains a steady presence against the shifting sky. Tom's offer was a bridge to a new future, but crossing it meant leaving her team behind, or asking them to follow her into uncertainty. The non-compete was a gamble, one Apex seemed willing to take, but the stakes were high, and then there was Greg. His motives still a shadow she couldn't quite grasp. Why had he acted so rashly, bypassing HR, rushing her out the door? The answer felt close, like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. Her phone lit up with a new message, this one from Javier. Meeting's done. We're pissed, Emma. Call me. She smiled despite herself, the loyalty of her team a warmth in the cold uncertainty. She was about to reply when another call came through, the caller ID flashing Rachel Thornton's name. Emma's pulse spiked. Rachel, the regional manager who'd been at a conference when Greg pulled the trigger. Had she heard? Was she calling to apologize? To intervene? Emma answered, her voice cautious. Rachel? Emma, Rachel said, her tone strained but professional. I just got back from Charlotte and heard what happened. We need to talk. There's not much to say, Emma replied, her guard up. Greg made his decision. I'm out. It's not that simple, Rachel said, a hint of desperation creeping in. I didn't know, Emma. Greg acted without my approval. I'm prepared to offer you your job back with a 10% raise and a formal apology. We need you. The Henderson contract is already wobbling without you. Emma's grip tightened on the phone. A raise, an apology, tempting but hollow. Peak Pulse had shown its true colors, and no amount of backpedaling could erase the sting of Greg's email. She thought of her team, of Tara's clenched fists, of Caleb's outrage. They deserved better than a company that discarded its best for grieving, and she deserved better than crawling back. I appreciate the offer, Emma said, her voice steady. But I've moved on, Rachel. You'll have to figure out the Henderson contract without me. There was a pause, long and heavy. Moved on? Rachel's voice sharpened. To where? You know your non-compete, Emma. 6 months, 300 miles. Don't do something you'll regret. The threat was subtle, but it landed. Emma's jaw clenched, but she kept her tone even. If Peak Pulse wants to enforce that, they can talk to my lawyer, but they might want to review Greg's email first. Firing me for approved leave doesn't exactly scream good faith. Rachel sighed, the fight draining from her. This is a mess, Emma. I'm sorry it came to this. If you change your mind... Now I won't, Emma said, and hung up. She stood there, the phone warm in her hand, the mountains watching silently. Rachel's offer was a lifeline, but it was tethered to a sinking ship. Peak Pulse was already unraveling, and Emma could feel it even from her loft across town. She opened Javier's message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What happened at the meeting, she typed, then hit send. The reply came almost instantly. Chaos. Greg's freaking out. Files are missing. Clients are asking for you. We're done, Emma. All 7 of us. We applied to Apex this morning. Emma's breath caught, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and fear. Her team, her family, had quit. Every single one, and thrown their lot in with her. They'd applied to Apex without even knowing if she'd take Tom's offer, their trust in her absolute. The river was moving faster now, carrying her toward a future she couldn't yet see, but there were rocks ahead too. Greg's motives, the non-compete's shadow, Rachel's desperation, and beneath it all, a question that burned brighter with every passing moment. What had Greg been hiding, and how far would Peak Pulse go to keep it buried? She walked to the kitchen table, the box still unopened, the succulent a quiet sentinel. The French Broad River flowed outside, its current a mirror to her own resolve. She wasn't just a rock anymore, she was a boulder, immovable, ready to reshape the river's path. Tomorrow she'd call Tom, meet her team, face whatever came next. But tonight, she'd let the current move, let the pieces fall. The game was just beginning, and Emma Larson was ready to play. The Peak Pulse office, meanwhile, was a storm of its own. Greg Nolan sat at his desk, his tie loosened, his phone buzzing with unread messages from corporate. The Henderson contract files were nowhere to be found. The Meridian merger notes a jumbled mess without Emma's meticulous system. He'd thought her absence would be a hiccup, a chance to prove his own indispensability. Instead, it was a fracture, and the cracks were spreading. Tara and Caleb stood in the break room, their voices low but fierce, plotting their next move. Sophie baked cupcakes in her apartment, a quiet act of defiance, each one a promise to follow Emma. Javier stared at his Apex application confirmation, his dreams of a better future burning brighter. Mia, Lucas, and Nora exchanged texts, their anger a shared flame. And across town, Rachel Thornton pored over Greg's email, her own suspicions growing. She didn't know what Greg was hiding, but she'd find out. The river was moving, and no one, not Greg, not Peak Pulse, could stop it. Emma didn't know it yet, but her exit had sparked a reckoning. Files were missing, yes, but so was trust, loyalty, the glue that held Peak Pulse's Asheville office together. Greg's gamble had backfired, and the consequences were coming swift as the French Broad's current. For Emma, it was a new beginning, a chance to build something better. For Peak Pulse, it was the start of a collapse, one that would echo far beyond the mountains. The Asheville skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Apex Transit Solutions headquarters, the Blue Ridge Mountains a steady backdrop against the October dusk. Emma Larson stood at the head of a sleek conference room, her tailored blazer a far cry from the crumpled work clothes she'd worn 3 months ago when she'd packed her life into a cardboard box at Peak Pulse Logistics. Her team, her 7-person family, sat around the table, their faces lit with a mix of pride and anticipation. Charts projected on the screen behind her told a story of triumph, 30% division growth, 3 major client acquisitions, and employee satisfaction scores that had Apex's executives buzzing. But Emma's eyes kept drifting to the small succulent on the table's edge, its green leaves thriving under the soft glow of the room's lights. It was the same plant her Peak Pulse team had gifted her, now a symbol of something deeper, resilience, rebirth, and a quiet defiance that had carried her here. 3 months ago, she'd stood in a Peak Pulse parking lot, the weight of Greg Nolan's betrayal pressing against her chest, her mother's voice her only anchor. The water moves, Emma girl, but the rocks stay put. The river of her life had surged then, threatening to sweep her away, but she'd held firm. Now, at Apex, she was no longer just a rock. She was a boulder, reshaping the current, carving a new path for herself and the team that had followed her into the unknown. Yet, even as she prepared to present their quarterly results, a shadow lingered. Peak Pulse's collapse, Greg's downfall, and a package that had arrived that morning, its contents stirring emotions she hadn't expected. The day had begun with a different kind of river, the French Broad's steady flow visible from Emma's West Asheville loft. She'd woken early, as she always did, to find a small parcel on her doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was her succulent, slightly larger but unmistakable, its pot still bearing the faint scratches from her old Peak Pulse desk. A note was tucked beneath it, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar. Rescued this from your desk, thought you'd want it back. Peak Pulse closes next week. Susan Hayes? Emma had stood there, the plant cradled in her hands, a rush of memories flooding her. The Christmas her team had given it to her, their laughter filling the office. The morning she'd packed it into a box, Greg Nolan's cold email still burning in her mind. The river had moved since then, carrying her from betrayal to triumph, but the succulent was a reminder of the cost and the strength it had taken to keep standing. She'd placed it on her windowsill, where it caught the morning sun, and driven to Apex, the note tucked in her bag like a talisman. The Apex office was everything Peak Pulse wasn't. Open, collaborative, alive with energy. Glass walls and exposed beams gave it a modern warmth, and the staff moved with purpose, their voices a low hum of creativity. Emma's division, the Pacific Northwest Operations, had become the company's crown jewel in just 3 months. Her team, Tara, Caleb, Mia, Javier, Sophie, Lucas, and Nora, had seamlessly transitioned, their talents unleashed in an environment that valued them as people, not just cogs in a machine. Tara's logistics strategies had streamlined delivery routes, saving 15% on costs. Caleb's data models predicted client needs with uncanny precision. Mia's client relations had secured the Henderson contract, a coup that had Peak Pulse scrambling. Each member had grown, their confidence a mirror to Emma's own. But success hadn't erased the past. Peak Pulse's implosion was the talk of Asheville's business community, whispered over coffee at local haunts like Battery Park Book Exchange. Emma's phone buzzed daily with updates from former colleagues, industry contacts, even strangers who'd heard her story. The most shocking came a week ago. Greg Nolan, the man who'd fired her for taking bereavement leave, had been placed on administrative leave. Peak Pulse's board, rattled by the mass resignation of Emma's entire team, had launched an investigation into management practices, focusing on bereavement policies and terminations. Greg's email, the one Emma had forwarded to Susan Hayes, was now Exhibit A, its cold words a damning indictment of his leadership. Emma hadn't celebrated the news. Justice, yes, but not joy. Greg's fall was a consequence of his own making, a river he'd set in motion when he'd chosen ambition over empathy. She'd learned more from Susan, who'd called under the guise of checking in. The board was furious, Susan said, not just at Greg but at the culture he'd fostered. Clients were fleeing, Henderson to Apex, Meridian to a rival in Charlotte, and Peak Pulse's valuation had plummeted. Rumors of a buyout swirled, with Meridian shipping poised to snap up the scraps. Greg, unemployed and radioactive in the industry, was a cautionary tale, his reputation as tattered as the company he'd helped unravel. Now, as Emma clicked through her presentation slides, she felt the weight of that history. Her team watched her, their trust absolute, but she could sense their curiosity too. They'd seen the news, heard the whispers. They knew about the succulent, which she'd brought to the office as a quiet statement. "We survived," it said. "We thrived." She cleared her throat, her voice steady but warm, the kind of tone that had always rallied them. "Our division's growth speaks for itself," she began, gesturing to a graph showing a 30% spike. 3 major clients, Henderson, Meridian, and now Wilson, have signed with us, bringing their business because they trust us. Our efficiency improvements have cut costs by 22%, and our employee satisfaction scores are the highest in Apex's history. This isn't just my win, it's ours. The room erupted in applause, Tara's grin wide, Caleb's fist pumping subtly under the table. Sophie, ever the nurturer, had brought cupcakes, lemon this time, her signature for milestones. But Emma's eyes lingered on the succulent, its presence a bridge between past and present. She wanted to tell them about the note, about Peak Pulse's closure, but not yet. The moment was theirs, untainted by the wreckage they'd left behind. Tom Brennan, Apex's CEO, stood at the room's edge, his silver beard catching the light. He clapped, his booming voice cutting through the cheers. "Exceptional work, Emma. You and your team have outdone every projection. This division's the heart of our Southeast expansion, and you're the reason why." Emma smiled, deflecting the praise. "My team deserves the credit, Tom. They're remarkable." "They are," Tom agreed, his eyes twinkling with something unspoken. "But don't sell yourself short. You're building something special here, something Peak Pulse never deserved." The mention of Peak Pulse hung in the air, a ghost that hadn't fully faded. Emma's team exchanged glances, their pride tempered by the memory of betrayal. They'd jumped ship together, risking secure jobs to follow her, and now they were reaping the rewards. But the cost lingered, a quiet ache that Emma felt most keenly. She thought of her mother, of the French Broad River, of the rocks that held steady no matter how fierce the current. This was her mother's wisdom made real. Not fighting the river, but redirecting it, carving a new path where others could thrive. The past collided with the present that afternoon when a courier delivered a letter to Emma's Apex office. The envelope bore Peak Pulse's logo, faded and creased, a relic of a company on its last legs. She opened it alone, the door closed, the succulent watching from her desk. The letter was formal, typed on letterhead that seemed almost mocking given the company's collapse. "Dear Ms. Larson, on behalf of Peak Pulse Logistics, we acknowledge that your termination on September 10, 2024 was handled improperly and without due process. We deeply regret the distress caused and offer a settlement to resolve any potential claims. Please contact our legal department to discuss terms. Sincerely, Rachel Thornton, Regional Manager." Emma read it twice, her fingers tracing the words. An acknowledgement, not an apology. A settlement, not accountability. But it was enough. She didn't need their money. She needed their admission, a crack in the facade that had justified her firing. She thought of Susan Hayes, of the email she'd shared in that sterile HR office, of the investigation it had sparked. This letter was proof that her stand, however quiet, had mattered. She accepted the settlement later that day, not for the payout, but for the principle. Peak Pulse had been wrong, and now the world knew it. She didn't tell her team right away. They were celebrating, their laughter spilling from the break room as Sophie passed out cupcakes, Javier recounting a client call that had sealed the Wilson deal. Emma joined them, the letter tucked away, her smile genuine but tinged with something deeper. Tara caught her eye, her intuition as sharp as ever. "You okay, boss?" Tara asked, leaning against the counter, a cupcake in hand. "You've got that look, like you're carrying something heavy." Emma hesitated, then nodded toward the succulent on her desk, visible through the glass wall. "That plant came back today, from Peak Pulse. Susan sent it with a note. They're closing next week." The break room went quiet, the team's chatter fading as they processed her words. Caleb set his cupcake down, his glasses glinting. "Closing? As in done? No more Peak Pulse?" "Done," Emma confirmed. "And they sent a letter, too, admitting they were wrong about my termination, offering a settlement." Javier let out a low whistle. "That's huge, Emma. You won." "Not about winning," she said softly, her eyes on the succulent. "It's about what's right. They thought they could discard us, treat us like numbers. But look at us now. We're not just surviving, we're thriving." Sophie's eyes shimmered, her voice thick. "Because of you, Emma. You showed us we deserved better." The words hit Emma like a wave, threatening to crack the steady facade she'd built. She thought of her mother, of the riverbank where they'd fished, of the lessons that had carried her through grief and betrayal. Be like the rocks. She hadn't fought Peak Pulse with lawsuits or public rants. She'd fought by building something better, a workplace where bereavement leave wasn't a crime, where loyalty was a currency stronger than profit margins. This was her revenge. Not in tearing down Peak Pulse, but in creating a legacy that made their failures irrelevant. That evening, Emma drove to the French Broad River, the succulent in its pot beside her on the passenger seat. The air was crisp, the mountains cloaked in twilight, their peaks a silent witness to her journey. She parked near a familiar spot where she and her mother had cast lines years ago. The water's rush a constant in a world of change. She stepped out, the plant in her hands, and walked to the bank, the gravel crunching under her boot. The river moved steadily, its surface catching the last light of day. Emma knelt, setting the succulent on a flat stone, its green leaves a stark contrast to the gray. "You were right, Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the water. "The river moves, but the rocks stay steady." Tears pricked her eyes, not for Peak Pulse or Greg Nolan, but for the woman who'd taught her to stand firm, who'd loved this river and this city, who'd seen strength in her daughter long before Emma saw it herself. The succulent was more than a plant now. It was a testament to survival, to roots that grew deeper in new soil. Peak Pulse had discarded it, just as they'd discarded her, but both had found a better place to flourish. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back, a group text from her team, a photo of them at Apex, raising cupcakes in a toast. Tara's message followed. "To Emma, who showed us the way," Caleb added, "and new beginnings." One by one the others chimed in. Mia, Javier, Sophie, Lucas, Nora, their words a chorus of gratitude and defiance. Emma smiled, her heart full, the river's song a backdrop to the moment. Back at Apex, the news of Peak Pulse's closure spread like wildfire. Tom Brennan called Emma into his office the next morning, his grin wide. "Your team's the talk of the industry, Emma. Henderson, Meridian, Wilson, they're singing your praises. And Peak Pulse, they're a case study in what not to do." Emma laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. "I didn't set out to sink them, Tom. I just wanted to build something better." "And you did," he said, leaning forward. "You redefined what leadership looks like. Your mother would be proud." The mention of her mother caught Emma off guard, a lump rising in her throat. Tom didn't know the riverbank stories, the lessons that had shaped her, but he saw the results. She nodded, unable to speak, and left his office with the succulent in hand, placing it on her desk where it would catch the morning sun. Peak Pulse's final days played out in the background, a footnote to Emma's new chapter. Rachel Thornton resigned, joining a consulting firm, her own reckoning with the company's failures. Greg Nolan faded into obscurity, his name a warning whispered at industry conferences. The board's investigation uncovered more than just Emma's case. Shoddy terminations, ignored complaints, a culture that bled talent. Meridian Shipping bought what was left, a husk of a company that had once rivaled Apex. Emma's team, meanwhile, soared. Tara landed a promotion, her logistics innovations earning her a feature in a trade journal. Caleb's data models were adopted company-wide, his smirk now a confident grin. Mia secured another client, her quiet strength a force. Javier pitched a startup idea to Tom, who listened with genuine interest. Sophie's cupcakes became an Apex tradition, her warmth the glue that bound them. Lucas and Nora, the pragmatist and the intuitive, collaborated on a project that slashed delivery times, their synergy a testament to Emma's vision. A week later, Emma stood before Apex's executive team presenting their division's results. The numbers were staggering: 30% growth, cost savings, client wins. But it was the intangibles that mattered most: the laughter in the break room, the trust in every meeting, the knowledge that they were valued beyond their output. She ended her presentation with a nod to the succulent, now a fixture on her desk. "This plant was a gift from my team at Peak Pulse," she said, her voice steady but resonant. "They gave it to me when I was their leader, and it came back to me when Peak Pulse closed. It's a reminder that we don't just survive hardship, we grow through it. We've built something here that's stronger than metrics. It's a family, a legacy, and I'm honored to lead it." The room erupted, Tom's applause the loudest, but Emma's eyes were on her team, seated at the back, their faces glowing with pride. They'd followed her into the unknown, risked everything, and now they stood together, rocks in a river that no longer threatened to sweep them away. That night, Emma returned to the French Broad, the succulent in its pot, the stars bright above the mountains. She sat on the bank, the water's rush a familiar comfort. Peak Pulse was gone, its failures a distant echo. Greg Nolan was a memory, his ambition drowned in the current he'd misjudged. The settlement, the succulent, the letter, they were milestones, but not the destination. The destination was Apex, her team, the workplace she'd built where loyalty was a promise kept, where grief was met with compassion, where leadership meant lifting others up. She thought of her mother, of the riverbank lessons, of the woman who'd taught her to be steady. "I did it, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I built something better." The river answered, its flow unbroken, carrying her words into the night. Emma stood, the succulent in her hands, and walked back to her car. The mountains watched, silent and eternal as she drove home, the future bright with possibility. The river had moved, but she had remained, a rock that reshaped the world around her, and in that moment she knew this was her revenge, her triumph, her legacy. The greatest victory wasn't in watching Peak Pulse fall, but in creating a place where no one would ever be punished for grieving, where family, chosen or blood, was the strongest current of all.